Now you're on. Okay. All right. Okay.
So we mentioned that this is the minhag of Yerushalayim, that therefore the idea of the whole process we went through last week of what's done after a funeral, the washing of the hands, etc., wouldn't apply to women because they don't attend funerals. Mm-hmm. So it was asked to me, what's the custom here in Tzfas? And I don't remember what I answered, but what I interestingly did discover is that there's a sefer called Eretz Chaim that was written by Rabbi Chaim Siton about 130 years ago here in Tzfas. He was a Tzfas resident. And he compiled many matters in Halacha. And he would always emphasize the custom of Israel, of Eretz Yisrael, the custom of Jerusalem, and especially the custom of Tzfas. And he writes regarding this in Tzfas, and he writes the following. This is not a quote word for word, but pretty close word for word. He writes that the custom in Tzfas is that when there is a funeral taking place, not only do the women not attend the funeral, but that all women that are outside go inside their homes till the funeral procession is over. So this was definitely the old custom of Tzfas. What's done today, I think we can imagine that things have changed a little bit. First of all, new communities moving into Tzfas that brought with them their different customs, and especially today that we live in a very mixed, different people from different sects of Jewry. So I don't know if today there is a custom that people are particular in here in Tzfas. Has anyone here been to a funeral in Tzfas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many.
So I think you can just testify right now that this is no longer the custom. As if it was the custom, the Chevra Kadisha would have the responsibility of doing
us away,
making a mechitza or etc. But it is interesting to know that that was the original Tzfas minhag, or at least the oldest testimony of what the Tzfas custom ever was.
Excuse me, wouldn't we? It's for me, it's unusual to hear the custom of the city and not the custom of the people. Like, what does Sephardim, what does Chabad do?
Right. So it used to be that until after World War II, before World War II, it used to be that customs were based on not Chassidim, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, this community. If you lived in, Riga, there were certain customs followed in Riga. If you lived in Berlin...
Is that Lithuania?
Riga, I believe, is part of Lithuania. If you lived in...
Riga's in Latvia.
In Latvia, okay. If you lived in Berlin, there were certain customs you followed of the Berlin community. Every town and every city had their customs that was binding on everybody. There was no such thing as somebody saying, oh, but I'm Sephardi, oh, but I'm this. It was pretty much everyone molded into the custom of Minhag HaMakom, yeah. It's only after we had a tremendous persecution, first after 1492, the expulsion from Spain, which caused many Sephardim to need to enter Ashkenazi towns and integrate. And in fact, in many of those cases, the Sephardim became Ashkenazim. Many Ashkenazim of today are Sephardim from Sfarad, from the Spanish Inquisition. The famous Rabbi Baal Shem, who was the starter of the leader of the mystics, the great godfather of the Baal Shem Tov, he was born to a Sephardi father, who was a fugitive from Spain in 1492. But the Baal Shems are all known as Ashkenazim. He grew up in Ashkenaz. His mother was Ashkenazi. So I'm just saying that back in the day, when this sefer was written, there was no such thing as you had different customs in Tzfas. This was the Tzfas minhag that everybody kept. When Ashkenazim started moving to Tzfas, it began bringing up many questions of, do they have to take upon themselves the Sephardi custom, as the Sephardim were really already here with an established community custom, or can they bring along their own customs? And this was a major debate amongst the Paiskim. of what they should do, whether they should adapt to the Sephardim or whether they can bring along their own customs with them. But nonetheless, this was the testified custom of tzfas that everybody kept, and somehow, some reason, it seems like it was a little break in this custom that happened, and people now go to funerals here in tzfas. May we merit that even the men don't go to funerals here in tzfas, so nobody will have to go.
Amen.
There'll be no need, but so long as there is.
Amen.
Let me ask you a question. When I lived in Yerushalayim, there was Dukning and Shachari. And when we moved up to Tzfat, there isn't.
What's Dukning?
Birchas Kohanim, Siyas Kapayim, the blessing of the priests. So once again, that's a matter that's debated between the Mechaber and the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch, between the codifier of the Ashkenazim, the codifier of the Sephardim. So in many areas of Eretz Yisrael, they adapted to the ruling of the Mechaber, the Sephardim, to do Birchas Kohanim every single day. However, not everywhere did. And Tzfas, for example, when the Ashkenazim came to Tzfas 500 years ago, they didn't agree to accept and adapt to this new custom of new for them of the Sephardim of doing duchening, of doing birchas kohanim every single day. So that's why here in Tzfas the old age custom of the Chassidim is only to do it by Musaf. We don't do it by Shachris. But the minhag of the Sephardim always was to do it every single day, not just in Israel but all over the world. They do it every single day. And in Jerusalem, the custom became that there the Ashkenazim did adapt to the custom of the Sephardim for different reasons. We know historically that after Yehuda Levi, who was an Ashkenazi Jew, of course, entered into tremendous debts in his will to build up Jerusalem, and he was basically expelled, and the Ottoman Empire forbade Ashkenazi Jewry from moving into Jerusalem, so the Ashkenazim had to basically act like Sephardim in order to make it in, and that's why till today a lot of Sephardi customs are followed in Yerushalayim by Ashkenazi Jewry. So that's how the formation of minhagim is very interesting, and the adaptation of grabbing other community customs. Okay.
I recently went to Levaya of a Sephardi lady in Tveria, who's my neighbor, and there were many women there.
Right.
And
I don't know what this Tveria minhag was.
And some of them weren't even separate from the men. I mean, we kept separate.
Right.
Like,
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know.
oh no.
A lot of people don't know. We have a lot of... The Chevra Kadisha has a very, very difficult job. As the Chevra Kadisha is dealing with the most sensitive, emotional subject in the Jewish life cycle. Okay? You have here wailing relatives. You have here, distraught... In most cases, you have distraught relatives, and people are brokenhearted, and you have to they tread very, very carefully not to offend any of the family and relatives. At the same time, there's standards that you have to protect for the Chevra Kadisha, of standards of burial, standards of funeral that we keep. So this is throughout history, everyone who is in the Chevra Kadisha that's dealing with a society that's not just your form of orthodoxy. You're dealing with this friction when you tell the family, brother, this is the custom we keep. I'll just say, for example, in Yerushalayim, when maybe I mentioned this last week, I don't remember, but when there was the pigua, when there was the terrorist attack in the shul in Har Nof, so a lot of Americans were killed in that terrorist attack, and one American father who was killed in the shul, was murdered a few years ago. His daughter flew in for the Levaya. Oh, she's related to Harel, the daughter, isn't she?
Oh, yeah.
They're married now? They weren't married then.
I don't,
Okay. So, I didn't hear the story from them. I heard the story from someone else. That she came in for the Levaya, and she wanted to, she came in from Miami to the Levaya. She wanted to participate. And she was basically told by the Chevra Kadisha that she can't participate in the Levaya. And she was extremely offended. She was extremely hurt. My own father's Levaya. So this is just one example of where you have the minhag hamakim coming and clashing with the feelings of the relatives. And this is an unfortunate, but so just because one Chevra Kadisha decided, we're not going to make a fight out of this. They'll have it their way, They don't forget, they do this every single day. It's not like they have a funeral once a year.
Yeah.
This is basically,
Unfortunately.
they're basically they're digging graves every single day. They're doing funeral proceedings every single day. You almost become immune to it, It's unfortunate, but when you speak to these Chevra Kadisha guys, they live a very different life than we do. They're living death.
We're living death.
So just because we've seen that happen doesn't mean necessarily that that's the way it's supposed to be. But as it says, Shem Epsayim Hashem guard us from all the different calamities that it says that befalls if women do come and the men look at them. We discussed this last week. So hopefully Hashem guards those that don't knock.
Amen.
Okay, we're beginning a new chapter. We're beginning now the laws of modesty or getting dressed. Not everything here is relevant to us, to women. We will, skip around a little bit and go through the general halachas that are relevant. So this is from chapter 2 in Shulchan Aruch, which discusses, the next thing after a person wakes up is that they put on clothing, they get dressed. So the first thing that's explained is that when a person, and this applies to men and to women, there's no difference. And we discussed this in length in our Tznius course that we did a few months ago, that when a person gets dressed, even in the privacy of their own room, even if there's no one else around, they have to do so in a modest manner, which means that they are not allowed to show their body to the public or to the outside or to the room, to the walls of the room. And so they're basically supposed to get dressed and undressed under the covers. So is written in the Shulchan Aruch, without argument, that when a person gets dressed or undressed, it should be done under the covers. The wording there is that as they're putting on their shirt, as they're taking off, let's say, the pajamas, it should be done as they're putting on the shirt. It should be gradually done together with the blanket. The blanket shouldn't just come off, and the person is,
Do people really do that?
bare skinned. The person is bare skinned, and then they put on their shirt. As during those moments that they're putting on their shirt, their body was exposed. And this has nothing to do with tznius as we think of it today, as, being modest because of men. This is a type of modesty that's in front of God, that God is everywhere, and we emphasize that. Let's just understand this idea. That the idea here is for us to be penetrated with the knowledge and recognition that that Hashem is everywhere. And the same way, if another person was in this room, we wouldn't do such a thing. So too, if God is in the room, but He's God, He doesn't mind. He can
He's
see
in the shower too, and we're not.
He can see through my clothing as well. You're right, 100%. Clothing don't block God, right? But at the same time, from our perspective, it emphasizes to us His existence and His presence when we do that. From God's perspective, it makes no difference. He sees it regardless, okay? Clothing don't block His sight. But on the other hand, from our perspective, we need to emphasize that God is here, and therefore we act in the same form of modesty that we would act in front of somebody else. Now you ask, do people do this? The answer is 100%. Chassidim world over, all Chassidim are very particular in this, very makbid in this, and we're trained to get dressed and undressed under the covers. There's another option which we'll discuss soon, which you don't have to do the under the cover thing. But in general, the idea of not exposing the body in the room. Now, as we discussed in our previous course, when we discussed this halacha, we mentioned that there is a debate amongst the poskim as to whether this is a good idea, a act of piety, a scrupulous way of acting, or this is a requirement or prohibition for a person to just, get dressed in the middle of the room, not under the covers. And we said the Alter Rebbe learns that it is an actual obligation. He learns that it's actually forbidden for the body to be exposed, unnecessarily.
You're not including the bathroom.
What's that?
No.
Okay, so there are two. The good news is that there's two ways of circumventing this issue. It may be very difficult for some people, or maybe for all people, to get dressed. You get used to it, to get dressed and undressed under the covers. So one option is the bathroom. since the bathroom, and I emphasize not the toilet room, but the bathroom, shower, or
What
bath,
if it's the same room?
Yeah.
no problem. But it's not just a toilet room.
It's not just.
It's not just a toilet.
Uh-huh.
Are they saying in English? In
Yeah. Restroom.
the restroom? No, in London English.
Powder room.
What is it? They have a name for just
A
the
water closet.
water closet?
Yeah, used to be.
Really?
WC, yeah.
Well, that's not the name I'm familiar with. I know that they have a name just for, they separate the things. The loo, okay.
But it says WC in there.
Okay. Okay. So if it's just the loo, if it's just just the toilet itself, that's not what it's looking for. But if it's an actual bath, then you don't have to be particular there against, you can basically get undressed and get dressed there freely. You don't need to bring with you a cape or a blanket in such a case. And the reason is very simple, is because basically any area that's designated for a person to be unclothed, there isn't a problem of being unclothed. Since, nobody holds that there's an obligation to take a shower with your clothing on. No one says that. What about modesty? What about God? Okay, when you're able to, you do. When you're not able to, you don't. So you're not able to. And that's why a person can take a shower the way they take a shower. But because of that as well, the Paiskim bring, and Moshe Feinstein brings in a tshuva, and other Paiskim as well, that you can also use the bathroom to get dressed and undressed. Again, emphasis is on a place where you take showers and baths. Just a toilet room itself will not have this extended leniency. As well, the emphasis that
So, excuse me, what if you have a room that has a toilet and a shower?
that's
in it?
fine.
That's okay.
The Alter Rebbe here emphasizes that this prohibition, or what we would call, according to other places, the act of piety, is only if you're able to do so. But in a case where it's very difficult, in a case where there's a necessity for the body to be revealed, then it is permitted for the body to be revealed. A person who goes to the doctor, there's a lot of, if they're doing, some chest x-ray, or they need their, hear their heartbeat, so they can obviously have that area of the body undressed.
Is it better for a woman to be with a woman? In that case, should she ask?
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, okay.
And then there's mikveh.
No, he said it's not about men and women, it's not, right? You
This
said it's
is
not-
nothing to do with men and women. This applies to both men and women, this idea. But again, the idea here is that when it's needed, if it's something that is difficult to avoid, then it is permitted to be done.
Right.
Recording. To such a point that it's even discussed regarding if a person has to wear socks. We discussed this in our course that we did on SNES, and outside of the discussion of, we're not doing that again, of wearing stockings, women wearing stockings and socks outside, but within the home, back in the day when it was a custom, especially in Russia, to always wear socks because,
It was freezing cold.
well, that's one good reason, but people just always wear socks. So then yes, it would be a problem to not wear socks, because, meaning on the outside, you can not wear socks under the covers, that's okay, but to walk around without socks would be a problem. But practically today, since today people do walk around without socks,
It's also dangerous. You can hurt yourself. What if there's a nail on the floor?
Socks don't help for nails.
yeah, you wear slippers. I'm saying, can you wear, let's say, sandals or slippers without socks? The answer is that today it is mutter to do so. It no longer transgresses this issue. In other words, even though in the Shulchan Aruch, Alter Rebbe the Medur Basa writes that it's forbidden and a person has to cover his feet, and even when he switches socks, he has to do it under the covers. To switch socks today, since it's common for people to walk around without socks, especially in the privacy of their own home, therefore this is no longer a prohibition. But nonetheless, there are Alter Chassidus Yidden who are careful in this even till this day, and they go to sleep with socks on. Okay.
I thought you shouldn't sleep with socks on for another reason.
Yes, that is also true. There is a quote of the Alter Rebbe based on a ruling that he wrote in Hilchos Yom Kippur that a man should not sleep with socks on. That's by a man.
Okay.
But
I mean,
nonetheless, there
why?
are men who are particular to sleep with socks on because of this halacha we just said.
But
that-
why can't you sleep with socks on? I didn't.
Oh, why can a man sleep with socks
Yeah.
on?
It's the body.
The reason mentioned in Yom Kippur is because it heats the body of a man, but there's another reason mentioned as well. I don't recall right now what it was. It's something spiritual.
Okay.
Basically, your feet need air. The feet is where, remember we discussed last week, there's a lot of klippas there. You're going to keep them constrained all night.
Yeah, but if it's
They
winter
need to
time and
breathe.
it's cold.
Uh-huh.
Right. Okay.
Well, the
so-
clipper doesn't like cold.
No, you could. So let's get the record straight. You could sleep with socks. There's no problem. There's a quote from the Alter Rebbe in the name of the Alter Rebbe that men should avoid sleeping with socks. And on the other hand, we have the Shulchan Aruch where he wrote that you should always have your feet covered. It's not really a contradiction. He's to say it's under the covers.
Right.
As soon as you go out of the covers, and you put on the socks under the covers. Okay.
The stockings,
Yeah.
should be also be put in the bathroom.
So, the rule is like this. Whatever, in other words, the idea is like this. The halacha that we mentioned, that the body has to be covered even in front of God, even when no one else is in the room, it goes by what's normally covered in your home when you go outside. Any part of the body that's normally uncovered may be as well uncovered in your room. So, for example, the face, we don't have to walk around with the,
Face mask.
whatever they call it.
It's
right?
not universal now.
What's that? Right, you don't, because it never became accepted way of dress. But regarding the legs, so it depends. If within one's own home they don't mind walking around without socks or stockings, then once again this would be a normal way of walking around. It wouldn't be a problem to dress or get undressed in that area in one's room. However, if a person is particular, okay, especially if there's men around, when a person would be particular to always walk around with it covered, then it should be put on in the privacy of the room. On the other hand, with the accustomed forms of stockings worn today, which is below 40 dinar or 20 dinar, it's basically see-through. It's really, remember we discussed in our previous course, it's not really considered covered. So it's not really covered at all. So based on that, for a person to only put those on in the bathroom and then go outside wearing the 20 dinar stockings would be extremely contradictory. I mean, if you hold, anyways. Okay. The Alter Rebbe and the Madura Kama, there was two versions of the Shulchan Aruch that he wrote in these first four chapters. So we have here a first version and a later version in this chapter. So in his first version, he writes that the sages stated, with the revealing of the hands, the house will drip. And this is a pasuk. And they said that this pasuk means to say that through the laziness of a person not being careful and properly covering the body, the house will drip.
The house will what?
Will drip. Now, if we would have stopped here, we would think this means that leakage, you will have a lot of plumbing problems in the house. But that's not what it means. It means that the body will grow skin ailments. And from here we learn that a person is to cover his entire body. This is a quote from the Alter Rebbe. So as I said already before, the Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch learns this is an obligation and not just as an act of piety. And he relates skin problems, skin ailments with lack of being modest in the privacy of one's own home.
The skin is claiming.
Hmm?
The skin is claiming, is unhappy.
That's the skin's protest, you're saying.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this is one good segula for battling skin problems, is to be more careful in these halachas.
What about wrinkles?
I don't know anything about wrinkles. Too young for that. A Maisa Shahaya is recorded in the Sefer Pela Yates with the student of the Arizal. Rabbi Yisrael, I think the way to pronounce it is Nagra or Niagara, who was one of the prime students of the Arizal, the Gura Arizal. So when he would sing Shabbos Miras on Shabbos, when he sings Miras songs on his table, hymns, all the supernal angels would come and listen and join. And he would come and join a Shabbos table. One time it happened that it was very hot in Sfas. This is in Sfas. It was a very hot summer day. He's singing Semiras. He's all in Dveikus and attachment with Hashem, and he begins sweating away. And they asked to open the windows. There's no fan or air conditioner. And he begins rolling up his sleeves. And he rolled up his sleeve above his elbow. At the Shabbos table. And a Baskali then heard a heavenly voice come from the heavens, right, and say, "Flee from this man who diminishes the honor of heaven." And all the angels left his house. We don't have to worry about this, right?
Wait a minute. So men have
So why
they
did you
can't show
mention
their elbows, men?
Let's finish the story. The Arizal, who was there at the time, he was a guest as well. He witnessed this entire occurrence. I guess Rabbi Yisrael Niagara wasn't necessarily, didn't envision all the angels there. But he told them, by the way, do you know what just happened when you lifted up your sleeve? And he told him that the angels left. He told him he says, you have a beautiful voice. It arouses tremendous divine unifications up in heaven when you sing, and the angels come, but you have to be very careful to always be modest and cover yourself. And in answer, yes, this story comes to emphasize the idea that we said before. Men and women are required to be modest even in the privacy of their own home in areas that are normally covered. So if men don't normally walk around with a tank top, then it would be forbidden for them to walk around with a tank top even in the privacy of their home. Okay? Now, over here, we can say, well, men, you have many types of men. You have Goyim, you have Jews, you have different types of Goyim in the way they dress. Obviously here, the determining factor is amongst Orthodox Jews, God-fearing Jews. If this is the normal way of dress, that it's covered, then a person would not be allowed to uncover it, even in the privacy of his home. It would need to be under a blanket, unless, as I said before, it's for a purpose of a necessity. If a person has an injury in the area and they want to put it on, you don't have to do that under the cover. So, on the one hand, we're emphasizing the halacha. On the other hand, we have to emphasize not to take this to unintended extremes. So, if it's needed, if it's necessary, then it's okay. If it's not necessary and you're able to avoid it, that's when it's a problem. Regarding the elbow, so it depends. In areas that it's always covered, then it would need to be covered. If people, today men are not particular to cover exactly to the elbow.
Right.
So, so wouldn't it be, for a woman it would be a problem, for a man it would not be a problem. But even men, we are particular. When was the last time you saw a God-fearing Jew walking around with a tank top on the street? Sits in a tank top. Maybe in New York during basketball season it happens, but you don't see that very often here.
In some Muslim countries, men are not allowed to uncover their arm above the wrist.
Really?
Yeah, they have to be covered to the
Which
wrist.
countries are these? I'll make sure not to go there. Which countries are these?
I can't remember. It was a travelogue that some Englishman was traveling through, and he was very particular. Otherwise, he would have gone to jail.
Jail.
Cover, full-length pants.
Speaking of tznius police, huh? Okay. Okay, we're going to go to dress code. Some of these things we already pretty much covered in our previous course of tznius, so we're just go through them quickly, summarize them. So as part of the discussion of getting dressed, of course, there's the clothing you get dressed with. And there is a prohibition of dressing in clothing of a Gentile, which is basically all clothing that Gentiles wear for the purpose of idolatry, or for the purpose of immorality. It's forbidden for a Jew to wear those clothing.
What does that mean nowadays?
What it means nowadays, you can't get dressed up like the Pope, even on Purim. You cannot get dressed up like a Buddhist monk. You can't get dressed up in clothing that are coming to emphasize immorality, such as those ripped and torn baggy jeans that are worn halfway down, that emphasize that you're part of the, for men I'm talking about, I don't know what women
The
have.
crowd.
It emphasizes you're part of, the gang, you've already shot a few people, with the chains. Yeah, it's a prohibition to wear it. Those are clearly clothing of Gentiles that are coming to make a message. They're not just being worn because it looks nice. No, it's coming to say a message that, I belong to this certain type of crowd. So too, back in the day when the mafias used to have a certain way of being dressed, and all mafia members were chashud al shfichas damim, and then it would be forbidden to dress like a mafia member. For other reasons, you shouldn't dress like that anyways. The mafias would always have internal wars, making yourself a victim. But the point is that any clothing that goes towards this angle would be forbidden. But if the clothing is worn by Gentiles, but it's not worn for those purposes, it's not a type of uniform of idolatry, and it's not worn for immorality purposes, then it would be permitted to be done. So for this reason, it's permitted to one who is graduating high school or college to wear the accustomed gown, as that gown is not worn for immoral purposes and it's not worn for purposes of idolatry. It's worn because that's the uniform that shows that you've completed a certain level of scholastic achievement, and there's no problem with that.
I remember my mother-in-law said that she was forbidden to wear a certain clothing because the Ukrainian girls in her city wore that clothing. Their parents forbade it.
Right. We discussed in our previous course regarding the color of clothing, so we said red is a problematic color. We went through all the different reasons. Real red. Yeah, bright red. We don't have any of that here on the table.
Is this real red?
No. That's
My
not real
bag
red.
over there is real red.
Right, like the bag.
About,
okay.
Okay?
How about for a porn costume? You think in particular somebody in America is dressing as a nun for porn?
So as we said, it's, there are, regarding the Isser of Leisilbash, there are Peskim who say since it's just being done for the Simcha, it's okay. But I don't think that logic, that heter, would apply to wearing clothing of a Gentile. The Isser B'chasem Leisileichu is not only when you wear it for those purposes, it's saying, even if I'm wearing the red clothing not for the sake of seduction, not for the sake of being like the guy, even if I'm wearing the nun's costume, not for the sake that I want to look like a nun and I believe now in Christianity, chas v'shalom, but I think it looks quite cool, and I haven't gotten a lot of attention lately, and I know a lot of people will start looking at me when I wear this. So I'm not wearing it for purposes. It's still usser. The isser is the clothing itself. So I don't see a heter for a person to dress like that on Purim, even on Purim. Regarding the price of clothing, so we have some caps given even regarding this. One should not wear expensive clothing. It's from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. One should not wear expensive clothing, as this brings a person to haughtiness. When a person, wears a very expensive clothing, they think of themselves as someone more important. Think of themselves as someone who needs to be more respected and dignified. Look how special my clothing are. And so a person shouldn't buy such expensive clothing as it brings to haughtiness. Nevertheless, one is also not to wear very cheap clothing in order so he not be disparaged in the eyes of others. A person has to find the middle ground. Not too expensive, not too cheap. But I remember growing up in Miami as teenagers, different brand names were like very big. Everybody was, you got a Tommy Hilfiger, you got a Calvin Klein shirt. People were really into it, and it didn't even matter if it was comfortable. It didn't matter if it even looked nice. If you had a brand name, you felt special in the class. There was a lot of peer pressure about these things. Nobody grew up with this?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, there was back in the old days also, there were brand names. I thought this was a new generation. Okay. So people, this was the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch hits it right on the nail. It has to do with the idea of gaiva. It has to do with the idea of a person. A person should feel special because of his knowledge, his achievements. Here, because of what you're wearing, you feel special. Because of clothing, a person feels okay. Someone with a low self-esteem, if his doctors, therapists, prescribed him 2 hot Tommy Hilfiger shirts, 1 Calvin Klein. Okay, for doctors, you take medicine of all types. But for the normal person, a person should get his self-esteem built up through other more
But some
accomplishing
people only
methods.
have money for cheap clothing. When I was younger, I had very cheap clothing. Because we didn't have money.
I understand. So, right. So, what does it mean, very cheap clothing? What this means is that a person should avoid wearing clothing that look garbage. And first of all, when you have very expensive clothing that look garbage, we mentioned before the styled
Okay. So it's the
ripped
way you
jeans.
carry it.
They're very expensive. You can
Okay.
buy $120 a pair.
Yeah.
That's expensive for a pair of pants. $120,
For
and they're ripped. They have more holes than they have, But that's so it's not really here the money we're referring to. It's more the style. It shouldn't look trashy. It shouldn't look. And that's one of the reasons why we discussed in the previous course why in some communities and many base Yaakovs or I think all base Yaakovs, they don't allow girls to show up with jeans. It's not because it doesn't cover the body properly or because it's too shapy, but just because it's more of a trashy type of material than is more elegant. So a person has to find that balance. And this, of course, by the way, also speaks to Bachrim. A Bacher, even though it's it's seen today that people, aren't always the most particular in how they dress, but the person has to find that middle ground that shouldn't look disparaging. Now, here, this is a little dangerous. Maybe I should skip this.
No, don't.
Next thing.
Don't skip it. Don't skip it.
Censored.
Do you need a coffee, Shana? Should I say this? When I get myself in trouble, it's going to be an expensive class, this class.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
You like that,
Okay. Shower mitzvahs Parshas Eikev. The Arizal writes, the Arizal himself was very careful about the halacha we just mentioned. He didn't buy very expensive clothing, not overly extravagant, basic stuff. However, regarding his wife, he was very careful to purchase for even the most extravagant and expensive clothing.
Okay.
He would fulfill her wishes even if he could not afford it. Wow. So the people on the Arizal's level, this is what they do.
That was the old days.
He was compensating for the fact that she probably never saw him.
That could be. Okay, we find also certain halachas regarding wearing stuff inside out.
What?
Basically, wearing stuff inside out. A person has to be very careful not to wear anything inside out, and if they by mistake did so. Now, no one, let's be honest, nobody initially wakes up and says, today is opposite day, I'm going to wear my shirt inside out. But sometimes it happens. It happens. You're very, you just woke up, you don't know what's going on, you're barely awake. You put on your t-shirt inside out. It happens. Or undergarments inside out. So here we're learning that a person should, Al-Tibi writes that a person should be very careful to wear things the right way. Now the reason for this is so other people don't make fun of you. So you don't look disparaging the face of others. And therefore, in such a case, a person would have to go to the bathroom and rechange himself, redress himself in the proper way. But what about if it can't be seen? Like I said, an undershirt is not seen necessarily. Sometimes it could be, depends, by the public. So, nonetheless, even in such a case, you have Paiskim who write, even in the privacy of your own body, meaning no one's going to see, a person should always wear garments the right way, and they write the following reason. Some Paiskim rule may wear, some Paiskim rule that based on Kabbalah, one must be very careful to always wear the clothing properly, even if they're not visible on the outside. And the reason that's brought down for this is because it's damaging to one's memory to wear clothing the wrong way.
There is the upside down, but there is also, how do you say it?
Inside
Inside
out. Backwards.
Oh, I meant inside out. That's what I meant.
No, backwards.
No, this part here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's backwards.
That also is not good for
sneeze
purposes.
Yeah, what
purposes.
exactly.
Yeah,
We live with
we do that.
Unless
Yeah.
it's the style. Like some shirts
No.
I do with the seams on the
No, like
outside
a,
now.
it has a better neck on one side and the other.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So what you're saying? It's worn that way. Sometimes the opposite because it covers
No,
more.
if
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
The-
we were
It's more
backwards.
sneeze.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen that.
Right.
There's not a plentitude of sneeze clothing around.
Mm-hmm. So it actually doesn't discuss what you're talking about, wearing one, the back forwards or forwards backwards. It's more referring to here of inside out. But no, it is discussed regarding something else. Let me just see if I can find it. Mm. Okay, if I come back to it the next week, I'll mention it. I don't see anything that I brought down on this. But this goes back though to the original thing, is that this halacha, outside of the Kabbalistic aspects, is simply do that. It shouldn't look, sloppy. It shouldn't look disparaging. So it all depends on what it looks like. If it doesn't look nice, then it shouldn't be worn that way. And this again emphasizes what we spoke about a few times in our previous course on tznius, that tznius and ugly are not synonymous. The person has to be dressed in a decent looking manner. Okay. Regarding garments that don't really have one way or the other being worn, like socks or a belt or a yarmulke, so it's brought down that these things that have no particular way of being worn, then you can wear them whatever way you really want. There's no real issue with it.
Don't men wear a belt in a certain manner?
A gartel?
No, a belt, a leather belt.
Well, sometimes you can turn it, turns around. It has different colors. You can turn the metal piece around. Yeah, these are worries that you don't have, that women don't have. Well, but women don't have belts?
Yeah, they do.
Okay, so...
But we wear them differently, don't we?
Depends on the outfit.
So I'm actually bringing that that there's a tradition that wearing a yarmulke inside out is a skula against headaches.
Wow. Then
Not for women, but...
Oh, but we can try with the shaitan.
you first.
It's not impossible.
Okay. It seems like back in the day, people used to walk around without shoes. I guess they would wear only socks. And therefore the Chachamim wrote in Psachim, it's recorded in the Shulchan Aruch, that one who does not place shoes on his feet is considered excommunicated from God. Hashem does not like people walking around barefoot. And so people are supposed to walk around with shoes. You still do once in a while see people walking around without shoes. Usually, I remember, I used to see a lot of people, not a lot, but relatively, in Jerusalem, early mornings on Sunday near Ben Yehuda. I guess somehow they lost their shoes or their socks, or they were too drunk to real. Yeah, I remember. I used to go to work Sunday mornings. I would always see people walking around without socks and shoes in the middle of the street. So this is, again, not something very common today, Baruch Hashem.
But it pertains to the house too.
What?
It pertains to the house too.
Could step on the
Right.
nail or
I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure if this refers to outside to inside. The simple intent is referring to, as I said, people even when they walked around outside would go without shoes. Not everybody had shoes. Today, we're all used to the idea of everyone wearing shoes. No, you don't see anybody without shoes.
Yeah, I do.
What?
We have certain granddaughters who like to walk around without shoes.
Outside?
Outside.
How old are they?
15, 16, 14.
Oh, wow.
I used to do that when I was
Which country?
In Israel.
In Israel.
In Carmel.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Does this extend to the beach?
Okay. Good question. Remind me about the beach. We'll talk about that. Because that doesn't, it's not just about shoes. There's many halachas that discuss the beach. Okay. Let's hold on to the beach for a second. So basically, and it goes on to say that a person should even sell all that he owns, even the walls of his house, in order to buy shoes for his feet.
Yeah.
So before you get yourself a mortgage, get shoes. That's what it's basically saying. Get good shoes. So good shoes are very important. Okay. I know Doc Martens, they have, you can buy one time in your life, and they'll fix it for you for the rest of your life. You never have to buy shoes again.
Really?
Yeah. From England.
Yeah.
The
they're
original
really good
Dr.
shoes. I used
Martens.
to
They're
have
great
them.
shoes, yeah. So those are good shoes. They're quite expensive, but you get your guaranteed insurance
For life. Wow.
for life. I mean, you got to send it to them. And get
Right.
that.
Right.
It's probably the price of a shoe anyways.
That's not what the orthopedists say. They say a good shoe is good for 6 months.
Well, Dr. Martens is quite, they're quite experts in shoes.
No, because we change. The food change. Our food changes.
Our food changes. Okay. Regarding the beach, and we'll conclude with our discussion of, oh no, we still have a little bit left. Okay. Regarding the beach, so as we already mentioned, the bathroom is an area, the bath, shower, is an area where a person obviously can, be unclothed in. And the same thing, and and it's not just because that area has a special heter, but it's because that's where a person is used to doing this, and which entails without being with clothing, and therefore it's permitted. And the same applies by a beach. A beach, a person goes inside the water. People are not accustomed to go with their clothing. People go without clothing, to some extent. They're not fully dressed. So basically, these laws of tznius that we mentioned, of being covered, and even in your own home, do not apply in the beach. Two types of tznius, right? Tznius between men and women, that we'll discuss in a second. Tznius between you and God. The tznius between you and God does not apply in a beach. A beach is an area where people bathe. It's like a bathhouse. So there's no unsneistic of a person being unclothed fully by the beach. So you don't have to wear shoes, and you don't have to wear a man can walk around with shorts or a tank top by the beach, or even without a shirt at all. That is not a problem. Now, whether he should sit on the lounge chair, without without a shirt, that's already a little bit of a different story. But certainly in the water, that's not a problem at all. Nobody has to wear clothing in the water. Regarding men and women, of course, so there has to be separation. That already enters the other subject of tznius between men and women, and where a woman would have to be careful not to go to a men's beach or a beach where there are men around and be improperly dressed in that area. But if she goes to a secluded area, there's no men there, or an all women's area, then there's no problem in whatever dress is used over there.
But what's the obligation if it's a women's beach with men lifeguards?
Right. So the truth is that it's very difficult to have a beach that's fully 100% proof, protected from eyesight of bystanders. As far as I know, even all the beaches here in Israel, which are considered women beaches, it is possible, not so common, but possible for men and women that are outside to be able to see inside from different areas. And the answer is like this. A woman we discussed this in our course. I don't know if we talked about this case, but we definitely discussed the idea that a woman doesn't have an obligation to cover every single ground possible to make sure a man is not going to stumble. She has to follow the general accepted and common practice. Outside of that, it's already the man's problem. If he looks, it's his issue. So too here. We need to have lifeguards by a beach, by a pool. We need it. It's sakanas nefashos, pikuach nefesh. Now, if it's possible to get a woman lifeguard, okay, good. We get a woman lifeguard. If it's not possible, the man who is there just like a doctor is in the room dealing with a female patient. He has the right to be there for the sake of, saving a woman in case of drowning, chas v'shalom. So there's no isser in that. And being that that's the case, there's no isser in the woman doing their thing and him doing his thing, just like in the doctor's office. Now, if the man does take it past his job of being a lifeguard and looks inappropriately, that's his problem. It's not our problem. This is the answer that was written and given by Pesach Derenu, that there is no letter of the law prohibition going in a woman going to a woman's beach that has a male lifeguard, even if she's not fully dressed. On the other hand, as the Igros Moshe concludes, that it's proper for God-fearing women to, it's mutter, but there's room to, try to avoid such a thing. That's basically his answer that he gave.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they make sneeze bathing suits.
Correct. Okay. So again, there wouldn't be an obligation to wear a sneeze bathing suit in a woman's beach, but...
oh, really? I thought a woman would have to wear one no matter what.
Why? We just said before, there's no laws of sneeze by a beach. There's no laws of
So you're
sneeze
saying
by
she could wear like a bikini?
I mean, I did, yeah. If
That
there's no
doesn't
men
seem right.
around, it's the beach. Let's be honest. People used to bathe in the river and in the beach without any clothes. Okay? That's how people used to go. Now, it wasn't a party. People did it privately, but it wasn't an area that has this, issue with that you can't be clothed. That's how people used to. Today we have bathtubs, so that's where we do it. But back in the day, people used the beach and the river for doing this. Until this day, you have.
And it was
You
an
have-
exit too.
But you're saying
of
about
course
the
it was
four
it was
walls of the
everything.
home that a person has to be in here, so
Yeah,
that's why I'm like...
Correct. That's why I emphasized. That's because there's no necessity to be on sneeze. It's an area. It's not an area designated for bathing your body. It's not an area designated, or there's no reason necessary right now for the person to just walk around with, being unclothed in certain areas that are normally clothed. However, in the shower, you need to. This is what's done. This is the place designated for it. In the beach, this is what's done. This is what's designated for it. So therefore, it would be permitted. We'll conclude with a story written in Likutei Diburim, an interesting story written by the Rabbi Rayatz. Conclude meaning this halacha. We still have time to continue. Clothing is not just a matter of, what we wear to the outside and to warm our body and look presentable. The Alter Rebbe explained that clothing has a certain very strong klipa. This goes back to what I said earlier, the different, competition of Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein. Clothing has a tremendously spiritual competition. A person's clothing is connected with him, by the way. And that's why we find that in the laws of Kavura, part of the Tahara process is that we have tachrichin, we have burial garments that are placed on the deceased, on the corpse. And it says, there's a halacha brought down, that the garments in the Mecham Shulchan Aruch, the garments have to be clean and elegant looking, and they can't be dirty, and we make sure that no earth gets on it. Even in Eretz Yisrael, that we don't bury with a coffin, we make sure that no earth gets on the body. They build a oihel, or they put a board or rocks on top of the body so it doesn't get dirty, so the clothing don't get dirty. And it's brought down, the reason is because even though the person, eventually, as time goes on, the body deteriorates, the body decomposes, as well as the clothing don't remain there. When bodies are exhumed, they're not exhumed with the tachrichin. The tachrichin get eaten up as well. Nonetheless, it says that the bodies will be revived from the loose bone, and they will be revived in those clothing. As the clothing have a spiritual root, so explains the Mavar Yaakov, and that spiritual root walks with the body and the soul even after the soul departs. And when it returns to the body, those clothing, that spiritual root, will return as well. So basically, the way you go is the way you come back.
When we do Tahara in Hus Laaretz, after we put the white, I don't know how to
Sadin, the sadin.
and the belt and everything, they take Israel, earth from Israel.
Earth, yeah.
and they
Right. So it's true, correct. We do take earth from Eretz Yisrael, and we put it by the eyes, and we put it by the mouth, and some put it also by the belly button, and some also put it by the palms of the hand, as part of the Tahara process. But we're very careful that it doesn't get anywhere else. It's only in those areas. We're very careful it doesn't get anywhere else, and it's brought explicitly that we're also very careful to brush it off the clothing if it gets on the clothing.
Which clothing? Ours? The
The
people.
tachrichim. No. The deceased's clothing. His burial garments.
Okay.
It should only be in those areas, and it shouldn't get anywhere else. That's why it's written that it should be done already inside the coffin. In Chutz La'aretz, where they bury with the coffin, right? It should be done inside the coffin, so it won't move around. You're not moving the body around anymore, so the earth will not get anywhere. The bottom line is that there is clothing has a spiritual root and existence, and it also has a very strong klipa. The Alter Rebbe says that this klipa of clothing, the evil of clothing, so to say, began in his days, in the late 1700s. And the Alter Rebbe was very worried about this tremendous clothing klipa, which was battling men and women. It's funny because we usually, when we think of klipa or evil regarding clothing, we think of not tznius clothing that's very revealing. No, not true. Until 100 years ago, men and women all wore unrevealing clothing. There was no such thing as revealing clothing. They have videos from the late 1800s in France, which is always known as the center of modernity and style and clothing, and everything was covered. Nobody wore something that was revealing. So the klipa of clothing is not necessarily whether it reveals the body or not. It's just that I guess it's how much you get into the externality of it, and as I said before, that you're wearing this very fancy garment and you feel very special. That's really the idea. So this was becoming a big klipa in the Alter Rebbe's time, and when his grandson Reb Nachum, the son of the Mittler Rebbe, was getting married, the Alter Rebbe called him over before the wedding, several weeks before the wedding, and asked him a favor. He asked him, "Do you agree to wear a patch on your katinka?" The katinka was a new Russian-styled, like kapota, leather coat that had a silver exterior that was worn on top of the clothing, and Chassanim started wearing this as another garment of honor and like respect and aristocracy. And the Alter Rebbe asked him when this was coming out, and Chassanim started doing this, "Do you mind wearing a patch on it?" A patch. You can imagine showing up with your Chassan clothing, and you have a patch on by the knee of your pants. So he asked him to wear a patch, and this is the Alter Rebbe asking his grandson. Reb Nachum, the Alter Rebbe's grandson, replied that not only does he not agree to do it, but he doesn't want to do it. The Alter Rebbe then offered to learn with him in private, one-on-one, that they would learn together. He would be his chavrusa if he agreed to wear the patch on his katinka. And
what's the katinka? What is that?
That garment I mentioned, leather coat with a silk exterior. And he still refused. He said,
Wow.
So the Alter Rebbe then offered him that he would be with him in his mechitza, meaning that in Gan Eden, Reb Nachum would be with the Alter Rebbe. So this was an offer he couldn't refuse. But he asked the Alter Rebbe, should I desire to do so simply out of subordination, or does it have to be a true desire? The Alter Rebbe answered him that certainly it has to be a true desire, a desire from the Yechidah of the Neshama. Reb Nachum remained silent, and the matter remained as it was, meaning that he did not wear the patch by his wedding. But nonetheless, it is brought down that the Alter Rebbe, when he came to get the Alter Rebbe's bracha, the Alter Rebbe took a scissor and basically cut off a piece of the katinka of his clothing and promised him long life when he did this.
Wow.
Reb Nachum, who back then they got married very young, we think, his marriage is like 27 years old or 35. No, he was a little boy. He was maybe 14, 15 years old. So, he wasn't mentally matured enough later on when he grew up. And he realized what the Alter Rebbe had promised him and everything. He was very regretful of what happened. And in fact, he when the Alter Rebbe passed away, he practically moved to Hadich. And he stayed there the rest of his life. He would the whole time stay there for years in a row, come back, stay there again for a few years. And he was always lamenting that he didn't keep to this deal that the Alter Rebbe offered him. The Alter Rebbe basically said to him, the Alter Rebbe said of this is that there was a tremendous lust and klipa being created his time for clothing, and he could have broken it by wearing a patch at that time. Okay. There's a lot to discuss about yarmulkes, but the good news is that women do not wear yarmulkes. We do not have to
Some do.
discuss. Right. We do not have to discuss this. And the one thing that we will discuss is the following. Well, why don't women wear yarmulkes? How about that? And are there times that women should wear yarmulkes or a head covering? So there's 4 different reasons recorded why men wear a yarmulke. One is for modesty, the second is for fear of heaven, the third is not to follow the ways of the goyim, and the fourth is to openly appear like a Jew. Now, do these reasons apply to women? So it's as follows: the wearing of a yarmulke is not a biblical command. It is not even a rabbinical institution. The sages never established and said a man must wear a yarmulke. A yarmulke is a classical example of a Jewish custom that came about throughout the ages as a self-accepted form of modesty, of showing fear of heaven, of showing Jewish dress, which the sages never got involved. And this is what minhagim are. Minhagim are that part of halacha that we, the people, contribute. You have deraisa, which is God telling us things. You have Rabbanan, which is the rabbis telling us things, and then you have minhagim, which is we telling us things. And this is a minhag. Wearing of yarmulke is a minhag. Women never took this minhag, and we can offer a few reasons why. Number one, women are already distinguished from the goyim by their more modest way of dress and their head covering when they're married. Let's not forget, back then, a woman who was 15 years old and not married was already an old maid. So people, were already covering their hair from very young age. From 12, 13 years old, girls would already cover their hair due to marriage. So they had a head covering. They always had a head covering. So what do you need to have 2 head coverings? So that's one option of why. Another option of why is because we're mentioning that the yarmulke is like a reminder of fear of heaven. Back in the day, and not too long ago, in all society, women stayed at home and did different works at home while men went out into the working world. So men needed this sign and reminder more than did women, and therefore women never had this custom to begin with. So these are the different various reasons why it doesn't apply to women. And in fact, for a woman to wear a yarmulke today would be an actual prohibition of leisilbash, of a woman may not wear the garment of a man. She's wearing it, in order to, if she's wearing it in order to imitate or emulate a man, it would be prohibited due to leisilbash. If her head is cold and she's, she needs the warmth of this yarmulke, okay, what am I supposed to say? I don't know how a yarmulke gives warmth, but let's just say this is especially one of those Bukharan yarmulkes, it gives a very warm, special wool inner lining. Okay. Nonetheless, the poskim do record the following. What women are not accustomed to wear is this type of yarmulke. But a head covering, we already know a married woman has to have. Furthermore, even though technically a head covering, a sheitel, a tichel is only required to be worn in public, and in private, according to halacha, it's not required. We discussed this in our course. The Zayir says even in the privacy we cover it. I'm just saying, from a halachic perspective of covering the hair doesn't have to be covered in private. Nonetheless, and you have people who do this. You have Orthodox women who, when they're in the privacy of their home, take their sheitel and tichel off and walk around without any hair covering.
It doesn't seem good for Hinoch, for the kids.
Right, we discussed this in the previous course of, why, and it definitely should be. We're not saying it shouldn't be. Yeah. But I'm just saying, you do have women who do this. You have a lot of Sephardi women who, unfortunately, they're traditional, I would call them, but they don't cover their hair. But when it comes time to say a bracha, they do cover their hair. Even the privacy woman. This is recorded in poskim that a married woman must cover her head when she says a bracha, even if minadin she doesn't have to cover her head at this time, like she's in the privacy of her home. And this is basically based on the idea that just like a man cannot say Hashem's name or a bracha without a yarmulke, based on the custom, so too a woman may also not say Hashem's name without a yarmulke, which is her sheitel or tichel. And now, what about unmarried girls? So unmarried girls never. This whole thing is based on minhag. Unmarried girls never had this minhag to begin with, and therefore they don't have head coverings. So they don't have to have a head covering by a bracha. Yeah.
When I started tshuva, I didn't have news from my daughter for a long time because she went out and free by herself after Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So I was praying all day. I had no news. And I didn't know about the necessity of covering your hair. But I was doing it because I felt the protection.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing I remember doing as an act of tshuva. It was like a necessity.
Wow.
The rest.
The Jewish tradition of many ages burnt inside your heart. Quench it, yeah? Okay, moving along. Any yarmulke questions? Good. If I was in a reform class, they would ask you all these, do you have to wear it?
If somebody is walking around a man without a kippah, can we assume that that man is not religious?
What's the ramification? What are you trying to get
Well,
at?
if you see somebody without a kippah,
Let's say he's not religious.
Yeah.
you assume he's not religious.
No, let's say he is not religious.
Right.
Therefore what?
Well, no, if he isn't, he isn't. But what if, he's Shomer Shabbos, for instance, but he just walks around during the week without a kippah?
So you're asking what should be the outlook on a Jew who doesn't wear a yarmulke?
Yeah.
Right.
I know many.
There's a lot of traditional Sephardi Jews
Shomer
and
Shabbat.
Shomer
Okay,
Shabbat.
so
Shomer.
I find this an interesting question because, if it doesn't have a practical ramification, why am I judging what he is to begin with? Now, if you're asking, is it sinful? Is it wrong? Is it against the law to walk without a yarmulke? That's a different question. And the answer to that question is that for men there's different levels of obligation of yarmulke. Everyone agrees that a yarmulke must be worn in a shul, and when you're saying a bracha, like I said before. But outside in public, so it used to be that it was only a midas chassidus, an act of piety, and not everyone necessarily did so. It eventually did become an obligation. Now, Rebbe is of the opinion that it's an absolute obligation. This is the basic widespread ruling in Halacha today, that it's an absolute obligation and it's not okay for a man to walk without a yarmulke today. However, in a case where, is it a religious Jew who walks around without a yarmulke, is that okay? The answer is no, it's not okay. Does that mean that he's not Shomer Shabbos? Not necessarily. It means he's right. He's misguided in this specific thing. Now, it happens to be that him and non-religious Jews have something in common, that they both don't wear yarmulkes. But that doesn't mean that he's, what? Religious Jews do wear yarmulkes? Non-religious Jews do wear yarmulkes? No. Non-religious Jews don't usually wear yarmulkes. You can assume a person wearing a yarmulke is Shomer Shabbos. Some do?
Some do, of course.
They're not
Yeah, I've
Shomer
seen-
Shabbos, but they wear
I've
yarmulkes.
seen.
All the time they wear yarmulkes.
I've seen it.
It's a little rare.
No, they put it just before Shabbat.
That's something else. I'm not talking about the person walks into shul, puts it on. Talking about a person who's makbid, walks around all day. Yeah, you do. You do have people that are living two double lives.
Yeah.
I agree with you, 100%. But I'm talking about the mainstream of people. You don't have a style of person who's not observant, doesn't keep kosher, doesn't keep Shabbos, but walks around with a yarmulke day and night. It's not your standard form of an individual, from what I know of the world. Fakers, you have a lot of. You have a lot of people playing both sides of the ball game. That's true. But that's not because.
Well, how about those women, those Sephardi women that are walking around with shorts and a T-shirt, but I see them at the mikvah and they're keeping all the
No,
laws.
I agree. That's true. That there is such a thing. That they're lax in one thing, but Baruch Hashem Tarsa Mishpacha, which is a lot more of a severe they keep, and we're not negating or degrading that. God forbid. But I'm just saying, I haven't seen, usually a yarmulke represents, that you fear heaven. It represents a certain lifestyle of an Orthodox Jew, which even amongst Shomer Shabbos Jews, you have some Jews that, are misguided with that and don't wear yarmulkes out in public. Bottom line is that it's required, and it's one of the reasons why today's required, because it stands out and it shows the world, that you're a Jew. You're not embarrassed to be a Jew. And with that said, may what's his name in the White House, Kushner, may he merit of this conversation that he should walk with a yarmulke around. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. I'll walk with a yarmulke in the White House. I'll be a proud Jew, and everyone will see that he's Jewish. And he's probably the most, I think, no, I'm saying of amongst all the advisors that surround the presidency, he's probably the least controversial of all of them. I think he gets the least, right? I think we can agree to that. So it's a big Kiddush Hashem. So obviously a person just, on the contrary, a person thinks, because I'm working in, the hierarchy of the government, I shouldn't wear a yarmulke. Just the opposite. You should wear a yarmulke. You should prove your point. It's a very misguided way of thinking, and God should help them.
Amen.
Okay. I think I'm going to leave this for next week. It's a whole topic already. And I want to dedicate just a few minutes, with your permission, to discuss the elections this week. I'm not doing a campaign. I don't believe in politics, but I just wanted to go through some important pointers of Halacha when it comes to elections. Anyone who's been following the daily Halacha, so we did a segment last week on elections, part of some of the information regarding it. And here in Tzfas, we're having another round of elections this Tuesday. So people have to be aware that while elections is a basic procedure needed to be done in every country and every city for the sake of electing leaders, and it sounds like a very mundane and secular idea, it is a matter that has tremendous Torah power, and it is recognized and acknowledged in Halacha in a number of different areas, as I'm going to explain now. The reason why I think it's very important to know is because traditionally elections arouse a lot of discord, machlekes, a lot of talking, a lot of people getting indulged into it, and they get really into it, and if their side loses, it's like it's like your team lost, and you feel very broken. And it's important to have some Torah infiltration into the election process, to have some guidance in it. And we also get very heated in conversations with other people, and it's today they have T-shirts that say "I survived 2016 election in the U.S. I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of this. I'm a survivor of Vietnam. I'm a survivor of 2016 election." No, it's serious. Some people they go through therapy. It's insane. So a little bit of it's not a joke. You have some people that they became so Anyway, so and if we don't have so much time, just in short, we find the idea of having elected leaders to make decisions for a city, a country, is, as we said before, a necessity of any civilization. As when everyone's the leader, that means you have no leaders, that means just chaos. You need to have elected officials who can make decisions on behalf of the public, so the public can do what the public does, each in their individual focus in life and their occupation. So the Torah gives over power to elected officials, that they have certain powers over the community. And of course, as we're going to discuss, through the process of election that the community goes through, and they are given certain powers that they can do. They have the ability of enacting certain laws for the benefit of the community. They can collect fines. A person can't say, well, it doesn't say anywhere in Halacha that if I park in a restricted zone that I should have to pay 500 shekel. So the government is stealing from me. And by me paying them the money, I'm being an accomplice to helping them steal. So I'm not paying them. It's forbidden to pay a fine. It's incorrect, because the Torah gives, and Halacha gives, a hand of power to elected officials to make rules and laws and even fines for things that, according to Halacha, there's no such fine for parking in a zone that has a, no parking sticker, no parking sign. Where in Shulchan Aruch does it say such a thing? It doesn't. But nonetheless, the idea that a government or a municipality has ability to enact laws is a Torah-based idea, and it's binding. It's also binding in terms, and this is important to know, where community issues by community leaders and rabbinical leaders have to be dealt with both on the halachic side and based on the needs of the community side. This comes up a lot when we talk about the question, which I don't want to delve into right now, but the question of how to deal with the child molesters. There's a battle amongst Jewish communities already for 30 years how to deal with this very unfortunate situation, because according to halacha we have tremendous limitations of what should happen to such a person. He doesn't really fit into any very extreme measures that have to be taken in the letter of the law Shulchan Aruch. On the other hand, this is a public safety crisis. So it's mistaken to think that there has to be a law written in the Torah that a molester that does this and this has to happen to him. If it doesn't say that, then he's okay. No. Elected officials, city leaders, and all members of a community have the responsibility of making takanis, institutions for the safety and health of that community. And even if you have a minority who don't agree, they get to choose. They get to decide, and they can enforce it. And that's how every government works. So the idea of government and government enforcing people and their decisions, I know you have many anti-government forces and political positions, but it's not the Torah's perspective. The Torah's perspective is that the political parties in charge, if they're properly elected, do have powers. So when we are getting involved in an election, we're not just getting involved in some secular, mundane idea, but we're getting involved in a very pure and Torah-based idea of setting up a government body that will be in charge of making takanis, institutions for the benefit of the city. Now, regarding how to vote and who to vote for, or how the elected officials are elected, so as it is today in democracy, it has to be by a majority vote. And majority of the city get to vote, and nobody else gets to vote. Nobody from the outside gets to tell us who gets to be our leaders, and if they did, it's valid. If the Rav Roshi, the Yisrael, decided, I have a very close relative, a big Talmud Chacham, and I want to make him the Rav of Tzfas, he can't do it. If he wants, he can present us with this candidate, let us know about him, and if we elect him, if he gets majority of votes of the city people, he becomes the new Rav of Tzfas. But nobody has authority to place anybody else in a position of authority over the people without the people choosing him. This is a clear halacha written in many areas. Rishonim, Achreinim. There was about 900 years ago, there was a takana made in the Dalet Aratzis in Europe. It was signed by Rabbeinu Tam and the Rivam and many Gedolei Ashkenaz, signed by over 150 Rabbanim of Ashkenaz, Rishonim, that anyone who uses his government power to place someone in position of authority over the public without the public's approval, without the public majority voting them in, is to be put in chayrim and to be treated like a guy. That's the wording of the letter, of the proclamations. This was a very serious thing, and that's why the idea of democracy and majority vote is completely halachically based and is very necessary, and to the point that if we find any fraud, the elections become invalid. If a Rav was elected or a community leader was elected with fraud, it's halachically an invalid election. Elections have to be done again, and he doesn't hold any power over the people, according to halacha.
Can I ask a question?
One second. The same thing is with voter intimidation. It is absolutely forbidden to intimidate voters. A person has to be able to vote for who they want, based on whatever calculations they feel that are befitting this candidate that he wants for the city. And voter intimidation is not only forbidden, but can invalidate an election. So if somebody says, if somebody goes over to you and says, I will pay you $100 for you to vote for this candidate. If you accept that money, not only do you invalidate the election, but you also invalidate your ability to be a voter for the future. That's what Tshuva Chassam Sefer rules. Election politics is not something that happened in 2016 or 2018. It's been around for Jews. Politics has been around for many, many thousands of years. And that was the halacha. If somebody tried to twist an election or try to buy voters or try to, or threaten a voter that if you don't vote for this candidate, you're not going to have a chayil kanel ma'aba. All of this nonsense is completely against halacha, and it's called voter intimidation, which is wrong. Getting to the main question of, so who should a person vote for? So the only criteria that's necessary in an election is that the voter does the vote l'shem shamayim. That's what the Rama writes in Choshen Mishpat, that when you gather the townspeople to vote on a subject, there has to be l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, for the sake of God, for the sake of Torah. That should be the calculation. It should be done for the sake of heaven. Other than that, nobody can tell anybody who to choose or who to vote for. With that said, the Rebbe spoke many, many years when, regarding elections, that although we do not pinpoint a candidate, said before, voter intimidation is forbidden. For a Rav to say, well, this is the guy everyone should vote for, would be complete voter intimidation. The Rebbe completely avoided doing that at all. On the other hand, he emphasized this point of the Ramah, that the vote has to be l'shem shamayim, and therefore he said, then when a person, so when you're voting for mayor of, Yehukapsville in the United States, so it's either this guy or that guy, that Schwanz or this Schwanz. It makes no difference which guy you choose. It's nothing to do with Torah and mitzvahs. It has to do with who's going to clean up the garbage from the floor quicker and who's going to do this. So you can vote for whoever you want. Everyone should vote l'shem shamayim, of course. Even in those elections, if you can't be paid off to do it, even in a secular election, to vote for Clinton over Trump. No, it has to be l'shem shamayim. You're doing it for the right reasons, no problem. Vote for whoever for the right reasons you want. However, when it's an election that there are, practical ramifications of Torah and mitzvahs that will come out of it, such as in an election where one is saying that they're going to open up shops on Shabbos in Jerusalem, and the other candidate is saying we're not going to open up shops in election in Jerusalem. So in such a case, a person would halachically be motivated. I abstain from using the word obligated, but definitely halachically motivated to vote for the candidate that is that is furthering Torah values. And so even though in an election there's a lot of things, let's say this person has a great idea of how to bring jobs into the city, and that's important. That's extremely important. It's also again halacha. Tzedakah, the greatest tzedakah is to give people jobs. So on the other hand, the approach that the Rebbe always had was vote for not the most orthodox candidate necessarily, but for the candidate that is going to stand behind protecting, orthodox values and Torah values within the city, when it's relevant to that. And the Rebbe made it. There are many people here in Israel who don't participate in elections. You have both the Arabs who don't participate, and you have ultra, Orthodox Jews.
Is it halacha to participate?
Who do not participate in elections. And the Rebbe came out here very strongly that, first of all, in halacha we do find an obligation to participate. The Lashon the Ramah is that everyone in the community has to be gathered, and if someone says, well, I made a neder that I will never take part in an election, we right away we sit him down with the Bezdin and we say, you're going to now be matir your neder. Everyone has to say a vote. And I believe in some countries they have a law, if you don't vote, you get fined. Is there? I believe I've heard of such a thing.
Yeah.
That there are countries that if there's no such thing as I'm not showing up to vote. Everyone must voice their opinion. But you have people who don't. You have ultra-Orthodox Jews in Mea Shearim and other places who they are against elections. The Rebbe very vehemently spoke out against them, saying that by not voting you're causing a tremendous michshel, stumbling block, because you're causing one more vote to be on the side of those fighting Torah values. And especially here in Israel, we have to be honest, there is a very real battle between Orthodox and non-Orthodox, and trying to secularize the city and the environment. And so outside of all the other very important discussions, which not to belittle or put down, what the Ramah writes is that it has to be l'shem shamayim. What the Rebbe emphasized that it should be for those who will protect the Torah values of the city, and that's who a person should vote for. And those who don't vote, or those who vote for a candidate that is promoting things opposite of Torah, I'm not talking about what he personally does. It makes no difference if he personally does a sin in his house or not. We're talking about what he's going to be doing in the public and make a change of the atmosphere. And in that situation, the person definitely takes part to some degree in all of those negative and anti-Torah activities that will occur in the city as a result of that person. It's a very interesting approach, and unfortunately, and I say this very candidly, it's very unfortunate that majority of Jewry don't have this approach, even in Orthodox Jewry. Majority of Orthodox Jewry believes today that elections is about who will best serve your personal interests. So if a candidate is saying they'll open stores on Shabbos, and they'll do all these terrible things, but they will give your candidate a place in the seat in the municipality, and he'll be in charge of this and this aspect of the government, then it's okay, and you can throw away your values for the sake of money, of course, for religious things. But so that's the approach, unfortunately, that many have today, and that's why you see a very strange, ironic, scenery where you have ultra-Orthodox Jews, saying to vote for the non-religious candidate when you have a religious candidate running for office. It makes no sense when you think of a child that's 9 years old asks his father, but what, we're voting for the non-religious guy? It doesn't make sense. But I'm saying this is, when it comes to politics, as they say, treif is kosher, kosher is treif, but this was not the Torah approach, and this is not the Rebbe's approach. The approach was very simply, Halavayit should never be about religious issues. Halavayit, that elections should be about cleaning the streets, bringing jobs, and there's no religious calculations involved. And then, of course, nobody has a right to mention who to vote for. Nobody has a right to mention anything. Everyone gets to choose who they see best. But in a case where someone is advocating for anti-Torah values and another person isn't, the Rebbe's position was very clear. The person has to vote for those who protect the Torah values. Questions?
I just had a small question because I didn't realize. I know the elections happened. Now we're voting for two candidates.
Right.
Is it because it was a tie? Or would we just do that?
In most countries,
I didn't pop what happened.
No one
candidate
got a
has to get,
majority.
well, it's not, it has to get 40%.
But
In
no,
most
it's a
countries,
tie.
you have to get a
40% is the
certain...
majority.
Oh. So that's why we're
With that said, I'll just say two things that the Rebbe mentioned, two different people. One person wrote to the Rebbe that they're having election fever. They're very into it, and they're fighting and campaigning. The Rebbe told the guy, relax. First, number one, he wrote to the person. He said, relax. Even if whether your candidate wins or loses, not that much is going to happen afterwards of a difference. Relax, calm down. Everything's gonna work out. Don't get so into it. That's one thing the Rebbe wrote to one person. And another interesting yichidus the Rebbe had with Avram Berg, if you know, in the 70s, he was the head of the Mafdal here in Israel, and he, is considered center left-wing Kippah Sruga. And he was in yichidus with the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe why the Rebbe doesn't get involved in politics. And the Rebbe gave the whole, we're apolitical, and you can't align yourself with a specific party. You end up then, basically, when you align yourself with a party, you end up alienating a large part of Jewry, you end up pushing them away from you. And the whole idea of rabbinics and politics don't go together. But then he said, but don't you always advocate to vote for the most religious party or most religious religious values? So he said, correct, that's true. So then you are advocating for a specific party. The Rebbe told him like this. The Rebbe said, I hope that by the time the next elections come, you will fulfill those, you will be the one protecting orthodoxy, even if you're not the one wearing the shtreimel and the bekisher. It has nothing to do with how the person looks. The Rebbe made that statement very clear. It has nothing to do with how the person looks. It has to do with what values are they presenting that they will protect and further in the area. Okay, so let's hope this will all be done.
Toda Rabbi.